Welcome to Stacking Stones podcast, everyone. I'm Pastor Mark, and today we have a friend of mine, Steve Cohen, on the show with us today. Steve, would you say hello to the folks?
Hey guys, glad to have you here.
Yeah, I'm excited you're here. So if you're new to Stacking Stones podcast, just a real quick thing, we have one purpose in mind, and that is to give testimony of hearing God and seeing his miracles. And the cool thing today, we're going to have a treat. Steve's going to share with us the time when he heard from God, and it literally just changed his life in so many ways. But before we do that, Steve, would you mind just sharing a little bit about your family, a little bit about your history, maybe a little nugget about your ministry you have called Now Found, just to give folks a flavor of your history and what you're about.
Absolutely. So I was born in New Jersey, spent a short time there, moved to Atlanta shortly after that, and through the next, now I'm 47 years old, I've moved about 33 times. So Colorado, Montana, Texas, just about all over the place. Most people ask me if that's military. It wasn't. I was just a nomad. Most of that time, I was an atheistic antichrist. So there's
what did you just say? A what?
An atheistic antichrist. So
Okay.
I believe that in 100% in evolution, that there was no God, but I didn't just stop there. I was antichrist. I used to debate Christians. I would rip their faith apart at the table. I found joy in ripping people's faith apart. And that's all based on like a lie that I believed when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And so when I was 26, after a 21-year stint of that time frame or that lifestyle, I ended up coming to Christ, and it's been a wild ride ever since.
Cool. And what is Now Found? Do you mind if I ask?
So Now Found is actually part of that part where I accepted and started loving on the God that I used to rail against. Shortly after that, I was walking through the lobby of a church, and I heard God say, "Steve, I love that you're now found, but I need you to never forget you were once lost and what that was like, how people treated you, how you treated them." And from there, I created actually a ministry called Once Lost, Now Found, but that's way too long. So we just truncated it to Now Found, the heart of it. And the heart of our ministry is that you're never too lost to be found. If I was sitting there railing against this God that I so love deeply now, and he was willing to leave, as scripture says, the 99 other sheep to come get me, I don't believe that there's a single person that's too lost for him to find them. Theologically wise, I think that God's like right next to them anyways. It's kind of just this revelation process for them, right?
Right. So, yeah, cool. All right. Thanks for sharing. That is, I mean, we could probably have a show just on your history and kind of your walk. But that's not our purpose today. And as much as I'd love to have that conversation, would you be up for just beginning and sharing, telling us a little bit about a situation where you heard God, and tell me what happened. Tell us what was going on, man.
Yeah. So one of my favorite stories is shortly after I came to Christ. So I came to Christ in somewhere around mid-June 2002, and July 4th weekend, I went to a Rangers game. And now I was an alcoholic. I started actually sipping on alcohol at my dad's football games, like he'd have parties and stuff like that. When I started sipping on it about 8 years old. But what I ended up learning is this lifestyle of alcoholism that now while I could go days or weeks between drinks, if I were around friends, I had to drink. And once I started drinking, I couldn't stop. So that alcoholic tendency where I based my identity on drinking, I based everything that I did, how I acted. And a lot of times I would act kind of silly, and the alcohol was my excuse for that. Oh, I'm just drunk or whatever. And I would just kind of flippantly put that off. Well, here I am again. Now I've given my life to Christ. I've come into this relationship with my rescuer, my savior, right? And here I am at a ball game, pounding down souvenir cups of beer. And then we didn't stop there. We ended up continuing on to the bar. I don't even remember what bar it was, actually. But I just remember while I'm there, still drinking, still smoking, doing everything I'm doing, I had this feeling, just this calling to walk over to the window. I couldn't explain it. Didn't I mean I can explain it now, but in that moment, I just felt like I was supposed to walk over to this window, and I'm looking out over the city, and I hear the words, "This is not what I have for you." And I recognized that it was actually the second time I've ever heard that voice in my life. I had heard it actually before I came to Christ back in the late 90s when God told me to reconcile with my dad. So I knew this voice. And at that moment, I recognized that it was God speaking to me. And I said, okay, God, if this is not what you have, I want what you have for me. And immediately I was sober. Just like that.
Whoa.
I turned around, and in that time, I'm actually still getting goosebumps. Like every time I tell this story, I love it. Just how much healing and freedom came from that 1 millisecond. Like he broke me from that. But I turned around and I looked back at the table that I was just sitting at, and I saw this darkness over the entire table. And I went back over to the table. I paid my tab. I told everybody I was leaving. Nobody even looked up to ask if I was okay to drive home. And these were my supposed good friends that I was hanging out with. And I drove home, and other than communion, I've had zero alcohol since 2002, coming from pretty much
Whoa.
every single, every single weekend, at least 2 to 3 times a weekend, going from that to just dipping bread and wine every couple of months. It was pretty cool to be set free from that. He also
Wow.
broke me of cigarettes, which is
All right,
also,
wait, before you get too far. Okay,
yeah,
can I ask you a couple questions?
absolutely.
So, so the result is that you're sober and you're not drinking alcohol anymore.
Nope.
So, but I want to ask you a little bit about the moment. So, when you had like these sense, you felt like you were called to the window.
Yeah.
Had you been thinking about stopping drinking? Had you been thinking about that being a problem? Was this kind of a big surprise for you?
So no, but it's kind of a weird thing, kind of like the cigarettes, which I mentioned just a little bit. I mean, I knew it wasn't healthy. I used to actually rail against my ex-fiance. At that time, she was a full-blown alcoholic, and I used to tell her like, "This thing is horrible. You're killing yourself, right?" I'm a little bit hypocritical because I'm doing the exact same thing, but I
Right.
knew that it wasn't healthy. I knew that it wasn't where I needed to be, but I couldn't shake it.
Had you tried? Had you
Oh
tried to
yeah,
shake it? Oh,
oh
okay.
yeah. I so much like the cigarettes. I mean, these are things that I've been dealing since I was like very young.
Okay.
Cigarettes I was smoking for 14 years, and I tried to actually quit probably, I don't know, 6 months after I even started, and it was on off on off on off. Alcohol, I would, like I said, I could go for a while, and as long as I wasn't around people that I like, there were certain things that triggered that need for it, and as long as I
Mhm.
weren't around certain areas or certain people or certain stimulus, but as soon as I got around those things, I couldn't, man, it was just immediately started drinking. So I tried for many years to walk away
Wow.
from these things, and there
Okay,
was
so
an instance.
there you were. So obviously there's something you struggle with, and you attempted, but in the moment you just sensed a calling, like, "Hey, go over to the window." You looked out the window, and God just spoke to you, and then delivered you. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Is that kind of,
One 100%.
wow? So did that freak you out? Like what was your like? Because I'm thinking I might be freaked out if I went from being tipsy or even with a buzz, and then boom, stone cold sober. But you
Yeah.
knew. So tell me, you went back to the table and you left. Did you know you needed to leave? I mean, how did that transpire?
Just seeing that realm, that's really kind of what was kind of shaking me a little bit, was to turn around and see the table that I was just at being having this darkness, what I can only describe as now as like this oppression or this something heavy weighing over it, and
Mhm.
like literally at the seat that I was at, and all around the entire table. And when I turned around, I saw that. I just knew I was done. There was no way I could stay there anymore,
Wow.
and I needed to go. And that's why I ran over there, paid the tab real quick, and gone.
Wow. And so you've been sober ever since. Is that correct?
Yep.
And so how many years ago was that?
That was 2002, so 22 years ago.
Wow. That is, I mean, I've heard people talk about getting radically delivered from drugs and alcohol. I was not. I went through a slow process of a couple rehab centers and things like that,
Yeah.
but I got clean. But the radical, like I've talked to a couple other folks that have had that. That is amazing.
And
That
what
is
I Yeah, what I
tell
want
me
to
more.
make sure is that what people don't hear is condemnation for those who still struggle, because
Oh, sure. Yeah.
God releases us all at different times and different reasons and different seasons. Like the mystery of God there is incredible. What all I can say is that I was delivered at that moment, that I was set free
Absolutely.
from it at that moment. And a lot of people ask, well, why do I still deal? I've actually had people ask, well, why am I still dealing with it? Why can't I break free? And I can't sit there and give them the formula to
Sure.
breaking free. I can't tell them, well, if you go sit at this bar in this seat, God's going to call you to the window and set you free and deliver you from this,
Right.
because I'm not God, right? So there is no condemnation there. I don't want anything
Absolutely.
to.
Totally agree. There's no condemnation for those who
Yeah,
are still struggling. But you know, when you talk about there's no one way, there's your way, and God's very mysterious. I will say one of the things that's been really fun about talking with folks who've heard from God or have seen a miracle. I would say there's one thing I've come to like know for sure is that there's no formula. Because a
nope.
lot of times we have our own experience and then we want to project that or map that all over to other people and say, this is how God moves, or this is how God is, or this is how the way God speaks. And it's been, and I mean, if people listen to all the podcasts, each person has like their interaction with God. They've all been really different. I mean, really fascinatingly different. Yet the result is always something transformative, something changed, something was different. And
Yeah,
that's like, okay, cool. That is pretty awesome. A lot of peace, a lot of love, a lot of amazing freedom.
yeah.
That is super cool, super cool. We chatted a little bit talking about doing the podcast. You mentioned you there may be another experience that you'd like to share. Is this a good place to transition and see if you want to share another one?
Sure, man. I have I've been blessed with so many of these interactions. It's not about me. I had
Right.
somebody today that they're sitting there, they're just saying, well, how does this happen to you all the time? And I don't know. Like you said, that I just look back at the pattern of where God has shown up. I can't actually, like we said, there is no formula, but I can identify the pattern. I can look back and go, this is where he was moving. This is what he was doing. And I mentioned a little bit ago that I heard that voice. I had heard that voice once before. Now I was, like I said at the very beginning, an atheistic antichrist. I railed against this God that I believed at a young age either didn't exist, or couldn't hear, didn't care, or didn't exist. And when I lived my life that way, but back in the mid 90s, before I came to Christ, before I'm still hating on his believers, but I'm driving along the side of a lake up in Montana. God had rescued me from some gang style lifestyles and things like that I was involved with here in the DFW area, plucked me up, stuck me in Montana. And I mean, that's a miracle story in its own, how that actually happened. But I'm driving along the east side of the lake, and all of a sudden I hear, you need to reconcile with your father.
Mm.
And it was like a spear that went through my chest, and I started bawling and weeping. I had to pull over on the side of the road. Now I was blaring probably like Rob Zombie or Nine Inch Nails or something along those lines at that time. But it just hit me. And why it hit me so hard was about 3 months prior, I drove around the 285 loop in Atlanta with my dad and my brother, and we railed him. We ripped him apart for all the failures that he had been, or all the failures that he had done as a dad. We told him we would never
Mm.
forgive him for being the failure of a father that he
Mm.
was. And here I am
And
now.
you're driving in the car telling him that?
He was driving actually, which makes it even more safe, right? Because he's sitting
Wow.
there dealing with that. My brother's in the front seat, I'm in the back seat, and we are just ripping
Oh,
him apart. Driving, and
oh,
we drove around the loop. And if you know anything about Atlanta, for everybody in Atlanta, that 285 loop in the middle of the night, it takes about 45 minutes to an hour just to go around that loop. So we literally just drove around that city over and over and over again. And um, yeah, and here I am now actually having this voice that I heard over my radio, over the wind noise. I'm probably going about 100 miles an hour because they didn't have speed limits in Montana at that time. So all this stuff, it's loud, and I hear that same voice that I heard in the bar a couple of years later. You need to reconcile with your father. And I called my customer. I said, I'm not going to be there. I lied to him, told him I had a couple flat tires, but I went home and I actually wrote a letter to my dad. It was a 2.5 to 3 page letter, forgiving him, telling I loved him, forgiving him for every single one of those things that I had told him just months before that I would never forgive him for. And
oh, oh.
what I didn't realize was that you need to reconcile with your father was so multifold. Yes, it was talking about my dad, my biological dad. But here again, remember, I'm this atheistic antichrist, and I hear this voice to reconcile with your father. Well, the father, being God, I reconciled with him about 4 years later. So there's this multifold, all these
Hmm.
incredible things. But here I am, as I don't believe in Christ. I don't believe in God. I hate the thought of him, and he's still so close to me. He speaks to me in a car and tells me to reconcile and restore a relationship with my dad. And the depth of the relationship that my dad and I had, we became best friends. He passed about 3.5 years ago, but when he did, there wasn't a day that I didn't call him on the way home from work. Hey, Dad, how are you doing? What are you doing? How's it going? Sometimes it's so still get choked up. 3.5 years, um, but he became basically my second best friend. First best friend is my wife, right? And if you get religious or theological, maybe third, because God's my best friend, then my wife. We could
Right.
we could
I
debate
feel
those
you.
things. But that relationship, he would just stop by in the middle of the day and just drop by, and I loved having it. We eventually moved him from Atlanta to out here, about 6 minutes away from us, and we just got to just have an incredible relationship. So to go from this broken story of hatred and offense and pain, and God just said that those words, reconcile with your father. And I was willing to go and write that stuff down. And actually, shortly, a couple months later, I ended up moving back to Atlanta to actually work on our relationship. So just the
So I
healing.
want to, if you don't mind, do you mind if
Yeah,
I'd love to
go
dig in
ahead.
a little bit?
Yeah.
So, so you're driving down the road, you're kicking it with some tunes, you
Yep.
hear this voice. First question: did you know, think, believe, question if that was God, or did
No.
you have any inclination that that was God, or was it I had a thought, or I heard something?
So
What was your?
at that time, I gave no credit to it. When I heard that
Got
voice
it.
again a couple years later, and he's setting me free
Oh
from being an
no.
alcoholic,
Yeah.
or that's when I was like, that was that voice. That was
Oh.
that same voice that I heard.
Okay.
Up until this moment, I was thinking I had a great idea that I'm going to
Ah.
go and I'm going to reconcile with my dad. Hey, look at this. I'm going to do this. Like it was all about
Right.
me because there was no God. And I was in no way, shape,
Right.
or form willing to even consider that God would speak,
Okay.
especially to
Okay.
me, right? Especially to
Right.
me.
Mhm.
I'm
So you had a
railing
cool
against this.
idea,
I had a great idea.
but you were balling. So did you had some level of emotion that thought, you know, was God speak? You know, God. Obviously, we can recognize now that that same voice was the voice of God. Yet at the time, you thought you had a great thought, but it was very emotional for you. You pulled over and you're crying on the side of the road. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. So that was the part that I couldn't reconcile. I was like, why did this idea wreck me so much. Like like I said, it was like a spear through the heart, man. I just started, I pulled over and I'm sitting there just in the gravel on the side of the road bawling. It's not coming down on my face. I mean, it was like the really heavy bawling because this was a
Yeah.
weight. This was, I
It's like
look back at it
grieving.
now knowing that was, yeah, I was grieving. There's something there that I had been holding so tight and so deeply that was actually being set free at that moment.
Wow.
And yeah, that's
So,
incredible.
so you skipped the appointment, headed home.
Yep.
Had you already? I mean, I don't. You're talking '90s, so this has been a little bit. Like the word reconcile wasn't a word that I knew much about probably in my teens and 20s. So how did you go from hearing you need to reconcile with your father, having the emotional outcry, and then realize I need to forgive him? Like that for a like where did you just know that what needed to happen? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. So some of these things, like for where I was at, it really doesn't make sense. Like why did I all of a sudden go, I'm going to go home and I'm going to write my dad a letter.
Yeah, you just knew.
That's what I need to do. And I just kept on writing. And I was thinking, oh, Dad, I love you. Sorry for this, whatever. And I was thinking it was going to be like this short little letter. And then it just kept going and going and going. And like all of those things, like you said, that we had been running around 285 telling him, all of those hurts, those wounds, those offenses, they just started coming out. And I had nobody that had ever told me how to do this.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of what I'm like, wow, this is kind of cool because you really didn't have much context for how to do it, but
No.
this is just what came out of it. So the Lord spoke. This is how it impacted your heart. You moved to make a decision to write to him. Um, this was the '90s. It wasn't like email and instant messages and text and stuff was really around.
Yeah.
Um, so one quick question. The distance between the railing on your dad in the car and the moment you had on the side of the road in Montana, how much time ballpark it? Like what transpired? Was this a
It
week?
was
Was
like
this a couple months maybe?
It was
A
like 3 or
year?
4 months because
Okay.
I had gone to Atlanta the Thanksgiving Christmas somewhere around there um, to just hang out with family and everything out there, and somehow that ended up being the nightcap for the evening was to rip my dad apart, you know,
Mm,
and so yeah, it was 3 or 4 months
wow.
because it was sometime early spring, I believe it was, while I was driving up because just remember all the trees were
Yeah.
in bloom and whatnot. So
Well, can't help but think of one of the instructions, the commands that the God has given to us is, to the children, to us, we that are here, everyone is a child of someone. Children,
yep,
honor your father and mother, so life will go well with you, and you'll live long in the land. It's like the first commandment with a promise. And so,
yeah,
uh, I find it fascinating that you jumped into really. I mean, when we're railing on our parents for all the stuff that they've done, which everyone's parents have done something that they disagreed with or wouldn't have liked or caused them some level of pain, anguish, harm. I'm not trying to make light of it, but it is the nature of humanity.
I'm a dad. I
Uh,
mess up
yet,
all the
yet,
time.
yeah, but yet God's ways are, hey, I want you to honor your father and mother, and when you do, life will go well with you. And I find it fascinating that like I can't really comprehend God and how He works. And I mean, there's some things I think I grasp, and then other things I can't. Yet this story is the testimony of how God watched you. If you look at it like that, He watched you completely dishonor your dad, and He knew your heart was hurt. I mean, you're hurting, right? And so He speaks to you, Mister Antichrist. What was it? An atheistic Antichrist.
Yeah,
And you were going down a long, painful road. literally, even I mean, I'm not trying to make light of the fact that you were driving down a road in Montana, but the
Yep.
direction of your life, and that he would interrupt it and pour
Yeah.
out his love on you in that sweet moment, and then somehow led you to write a letter to your dad, and then you guys reconcile, and he becomes such a good friend of yours. Um, Man, that is such an incredible testimony to who God is, to the nature of God,
Yeah.
how deeply He loves us and cares for us, every single person. I really appreciated that what you said earlier in our interview when you mentioned like there's no one's too lost to be found. Like He is so close to us and wants us um, to be with Him. Like it's a mutual. He would like to be with us just as much as now that we are found. We want to be with Him, right? And
Yeah.
so that's a pretty. I feel like He went to great lengths, in my opinion, to let you know how much He loves you and that He is real, and just the gifts that He's given you. I mean, that's such a gift to have a great relationship with your dad, right?
Absolutely. And the fact that he didn't come and he didn't condemn me. Like
Right.
we're talking about the freedom and me being set free from alcohol. There wasn't condemnation. He didn't come and berate me and tell me of a horrible son I was and the hurt or my like poured out over my dad. He just simply those simple words, you need to reconcile with your father. And it's
Yeah.
just this love. It's like, was that for my dad or was that for me? Apparently it was actually for me because it set me free from so much hurt and so much pain. But then the fact that like I mailed it to him, and it was actually about a week or two, because remember, this is snail mail, this is an email.
Right.
It was
Right.
a week or so later, my dad calls me and he's like, "You got your letter, can we talk?" And man, I was like, it poured out healing into areas of my dad's life. He had never heard words like those before. His dad was not a great example of what love looked like, what relationship looked like, what reconciliation looked like. Like I remember my dad, the last experience that I had with my grandfather, my dad actually kicked my grandpa under the table.
Mm.
He was getting him back for being kicked under the table for 20 years. And like the hurt that my dad had to have experienced in that situation, growing up like that, he had never received anything like this. And it was actually just a couple months before my dad passed that I got to have a very deep conversation about how much God loved him. Despite all the hurt and the trauma and everything that he went through as a kid,
Right.
he received that love. And it was actually just a couple months before he passed that he ended up giving his life to Christ. It was about that very short time after that discussion. So
Cool.
75 years old. So, but and
Man.
God is going to always pursue us, and He's not going to just sit there and condemn us and beat us up. He's going to love us if we're willing to be loved on. So,
Amen. Dude, that's amazing. Dude, I'm so glad we had time to talk about that as well. That was wow. Love that. Love that. That is definitely hearing from God and having some transformation. That is pretty cool. Well,
yeah,
Steve, I like to and part of our ministry is that we take these testimonies and we're going to transcribe them, and each year we're going to have a book of testimonies. And so at some point, your kids are going to pick up this book, your grandkids, maybe your grandkids, and they're going to read, whatever your grandpa name is, Pop or Poppy or whatever,
I think we're
um,
going with Abba.
what is it? Abba?
Yeah.
That's good. So, what would you want to speak to them? Like if this was something you'd want to say, what would you want to encourage them? Is there any wisdom that you would want to impart to them, and also to technically to our audience, like who's listening?
Yeah. So this this phrase, never too lost to be found, that's on my shirt, is not just about us, but it's also how we look at other people, that they are God's child. And if we can, and this is what we talk about this all the time with our kids, for now, and I hope that they're going to talk to their kids about it. But if it's just in this book, I want them to know that when we change our mindset, when we stop looking at people through the lens of judgment, and we start looking at people through the lens of compassion and empathy, and ask God what He wants to say about His kiddos sitting in front of us, everything changes. When we're willing to look at a person that may be yelling and screaming in our face, or maybe have a totally different political view, or maybe whatever it is that is in opposition of you, when you sit there and go, man, this God, you love this person. You loved me. I was not too lost to be found. They're not too lost to be found. So God, what do you want to say? What's that one word right now that can let them know that you love them unconditionally? That you want to talk with them, you want to be with them. And when we do that, that's actually when we actually hear from God and speak it. We know that as prophecy, or I would describe that as prophecy, hearing God and speaking it to His children. But when we need to do that on a regular basis, every moment of every day with every person that we come in contact, and it sets us free of all the judgment and prejudice and everything else.
Cool.
Change the mindset.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate you. I appreciate your testimony of what God's done in your life, and how you're living your life and pursuing Him, and loving on others. So thank you so much. So excited you came on today. Love you,
Thanks for
brother.
letting me
Have a
come
great
on.
day. See y'all
You
next
too.
time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye now.
See you guys.
If you would like to give a testimony of hearing God or seeing a miracle, we would love to hear from you. We invite you to pray and ask the Lord if this is a time for you to share that testimony. And if it is, we would love to hear from you. Please email us. Our email is info@stackingstones.life. info@stackingstones.life. We just pray that the testimony of Jesus will encourage you to pursue Him even more. God bless you.